In this video, we'll create a responsive Bootstrap website with a fixed image landing page. Okay guys, so let's take a look at the design here before we get started. In the upper left hand corner we have our logo followed by the navigation on the right hand side here, which later will turn into the mobile nav. And then we have the Bootstrap heading here with the Get Started button as our fixed image landing page. So as we scroll up, we'll find that the next section is going to scroll right over that mountain background image. Then we'll have a 2-column section, a 4-column section, then this fixed image sort of scrolling parallax feel, followed by another 2-column section, and then the footer here with some contact us information, including these social media buttons that will link to our social pages. So let's go ahead and scroll back up, and then we'll take a look at the responsiveness and how it's going to appear on the mobile version. So let's start with checking out the navigation here on the mobile version. So if we select the button here, we'll have our Bootstrap collapsing mobile drop-down navigation, and let's take a look at how the rest of it feels on, say, an iPhone 10 here. So if we scroll up, we're still going to have the fixed image background there for the top image with the mountain, as well as this colorful keyboard image with the Mac computer in the background. And then of course we have the social section here at the bottom in the contact section. Alright, so let's scroll back up and then we'll find out what we need to get started with this tutorial. So in the description of this video will be the free download for the starter files here from my website that you can grab, and once you grab them you'll find that we have an image folder here containing all of the images that will be used throughout the tutorial to make the Bootstrap website, and then we also have index.html and style.css already started for us. So the program that I'm going to be using throughout the tutorial is called Sublime Text, which is a free text editor you can get from sublimetext.com. And then as we're building the website, I'm going to have index.html open in Google Chrome alongside the finished version that we're seeing behind the starter files right now. So I'm going to pull up index.html here in Chrome from the starter files, and let's take a look at the files here in Sublime Text. So as you can see at the top, we have style.css and index.html. So at the top of our HTML page here, we have our title of the website. Then we have viewport width, device width, initial scale 1 for mobile websites. Then uploaded to the web already, we have Bootstrap's CSS file. We have the Font Awesome CSS file, and if you're unfamiliar with Font Awesome, let me just show you here at the bottom of the website. That's what's going to allow us to create these icons here to our social media pages, and they have a whole boatload of icons if you just do a Google search for Font Awesome. Then we have our jQuery.js file and Bootstrap.js file. Then, of course, our style.css file from the starter files that we're linking to right here. Okay, so let's go and drop down. So we're inside of the body section of the website and we can get started with our first tag. Let's get started with our Bootstrap navigation. So we'll start off with a nav tag and we're going to give it a class and say Navbar dash default as Bootstrap's default navigation bar, Navbar dash fixed dash top. So our navigation bar stays fixed at the top, and then we'll give it the role of navigation, and then we can drop down and close out our nav tag. Okay, so the next thing that we'll do is create a container here. So we'll write div class container fluid, which is best for Bootstrap's mobile websites, and then close out the div. And then we'll add the header to our navigation bar. So div class navbar dash header, which is the blue navigation header we're seeing in the upper left hand corner right now. And then you can drop down and we'll close out that div. And now we'll create the button, which is our drop down button. Let me just flex this down so we can take a look at what we're laying out here. Okay, so this will be the button in the right hand corner here. So we'll start with the button tag and then type button class navbar dash toggle, since it's going to toggle our navigation. Data dash toggle collapse, because it's a collapsible navigation menu with the drop down, and then when we select the button it collapses. And then data target pound or hashtag navbar dash collapse dash main. Okay, and then we'll drop down and close out our button tag here. And the next thing that we're going to do is add the burger menu inside of that button, which is right here with the 3 tiers. So we'll need to add the icon bars individually, but first let's add a span class here that is called sr-only, and then you can write whatever you want in between the span here, referencing the navigation. So SR only is for folks who use screen readers that may not be able to tell that there's a navigation button there. And then for our icon bar, we'll add another span class and we'll say icon-bar and then close out the span. And I'm gonna speed us up here a little bit by just pasting this 2 times over to give us all 3 icon bars in our drop-down navigation button. So let's take a look at what we have so far. So we have just the blank gray bar up there, and then we have our button with the 3 icon bars. Alright, so the next thing that we're going to do is add our logo. So in the starter files we already have this image. All we need to do is reference it. So let's drop down underneath the button tag and we'll say a class navbar dash brand, which is for logo images, href, and then you can put a link in here if you want. I'm just going to do the pound symbol or hashtag for now to keep us on the same page. And then the image is img for the img or image folder / w3newbie.png. And then after that, remember to close out your A tag. And let's take a look at it here on the version we're working on. So if I refresh, there we have the logo in the upper left hand corner, which later in the CSS we're going to make fit inside of the navigation header or navbar header up there. Alright, so now let's go ahead and add our unordered list followed by our list items for the navigation links. So we'll start it off with div class collapse space navbar dash collapse, because this is the section that's going to be collapsing, and then id navbar dash collapse dash main, and then drop down and close out your div. And now we can start our unordered list. Okay, so ul class navbar dash nav, and then navbar dash right, since we want our list items or nav links to display on the right hand side. And then close out your unordered list and we can start our first list item. So li and then a And I'm going to give this a class and call it active. So we style it differently from the rest to tell us that we're on that particular page, at least for home. And then I'll close out my link tag. And now if we go back and refresh, we have our first navigation link up here. Alright, so now let's drop down and add our next list item. So LIA href, I'm just going to do the hashtag, and I forgot to do the href for the home link here. Okay, and then this one is about. Alright, so if we refresh, there we have our second navigation link. So the next one is services, then testimonials, and contact. So liahref pound services liahref, and this one is testimonials. And then the last one, liahref and contact. Alright, so let me know what you guys think about the speed at which I'm going about the tutorial here in the comment section below, if you want me to go faster or you want me to slow it down some so you have more time to catch up. So that does it for all of our HTML for the navigation. We'll finish it off once we get to our style sheet. So now let's drop down and get started with the fixed image background here, sort of the landing page of the website with the mountain background here, and then we have our heading information inside of there. So let's start it off with div ID home, and then inside of there we'll say div class landing dash text, and then we'll add a heading 1 after we close out this div. So h1 Bootstrap, and I'm going to put it in all caps here. And then let's drop down underneath it, and we're not going to be able to see it now. We'll have to add some padding later since it's a fixed navigation. And we'll do our heading 3 where it says learn the basic building blocks. Okay, and now let's add our Bootstrap Get Started button underneath there. So we'll write ahref. I'm just going to do the hashtag here, or pound symbol, and then class btn, and then btn-default, and then btn-lg for a large styled Bootstrap button. So default gives us the sort of gray-white feel for the Bootstrap button, and then obviously LG for large. Okay, so now if we refresh, there we have our heading 3 as well as the Get Started button. So we're going to add the mountain background image once we get to the CSS. For now, let's drop down to the next section where we have the image on the left and then the heading and paragraph text underneath it. Alright, so this is going to be our row, which is a 2-column row. So we're going to create a div class around the container first, and we're just going to call it padding. So div class padding, and then div class container, and then close out your div for container. So we're going to use the padding class obviously to use some padding around the container. We could add, I suppose, an ID in addition to the container there, but we'll just stick with the padding div here. Okay, and then we have div class row for Bootstrap, which will include both columns here. So the next thing we have is div class col for column small 6. So basically what this means as I add the image here is Bootstrap has 12 columns, so using up 6 will mean it's half of the page, and SM, meaning small, is basically the breakpoint at 768 pixels for Bootstrap. So basically we're saying here that we want 2 columns larger than, or anything larger than 768 pixels, we want it to display at 2 columns, and anything under that we want it to display at 1 column. Okay, so if we refresh, there we have our Bootstrap image here, and then let's move on to our second column. Okay, so div class col dash sm dash 6. So 6 meaning half of the page, and then we'll write text center because we want it to center our text. And then let's add the H2 here, which is all about using Bootstrap. And then underneath it we'll add a paragraph tag. But what we're going to do is we're going to use a Bootstrap class called lead. So here we have our heading 2. Bootstrap class called lead, which makes our paragraph text a lightweight, so say about a weight of 400 or maybe 300, and then it's going to be a little bit larger than regular paragraph text. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy this and paste it down here. If you want, you can do the paragraph without class lead and with class lead to tell the difference, or you can look to the paragraph that I have in the next section. Okay, so now let's drop down to our next container, which has the 4 columns here. All right. So I'm also going to wrap this with a div class padding, and then we'll add our container. So div class container, and then we'll add our row. And then I'm going to go ahead and just close out these divs. And then we can add the first of our 4 columns. All right, so we're going to start with a div class. And if you remember, Bootstrap has 4 columns, right? So, and then there are 4 different screen widths that they break at. So the largest here is LG, so we're going to have it display at 4 columns, so 12 divided by 3 is 4 columns, right? On large and medium-sized screens, we'll have it at 4 columns. Then on smaller screens, so anything less than 768 pixels, we'll have it display at 2 columns. And then on extra small screens, which I believe is slightly less than 600 pixels, we'll have it display at 1 column. All right, so now let me just show you what I mean here. So we go from 4 columns to 2 columns. So here we have 4 columns, 4 columns, then 2 columns, and then finally we get down to 1 column on the smallest of screens for cell phones, for example. Okay, and then if we're going in the opposite direction, we're going from 1 column to 2 columns to 4 columns here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and copy this, and then we'll paste it 3 times over for each of the 4 columns, and then we'll add our content. All right, so there's 1, 2, and 3. All right, so inside of the first one here, we have a heading, and then a paragraph section. So let's use an H4, and I'll just write built with Sass. Okay, and then I'm just going to copy and paste this placeholder text. Alright, and then let's drop down to the next column, and we'll reference the Sass image. So if you don't know what Sass and less are, they're CSS preprocessors. Right? And then we're going to give this this image a class, and we're just going to say image-responsive. Okay, so there we have our first and second columns. Okay, so now when we get down to a single column width, the image-responsive class knows to make the image responsive. And then for the third column here, I'm just going to copy and paste from the first, and we'll say and less instead of built with Sass. And then for the fourth one, we'll add the image here, and we'll just change this to less. Alright, and then we can drop down under this row or container. There we have all 4 sections. And now let's add the fixed scrolling background here, the fixed image. So all we'll need to do is a simple div. So I'm just going to say div ID fixed, and then we'll close out our div, and we'll be adding the image and the spacing to make it possible in the CSS in just a few minutes. Okay, so next let's drop down to this 2-column section, similar to the one above. So what we can do is, if you want to make this a little quicker, we can just copy this from above and paste it in here, and then we'll do a little bit of changing. I'm just going to cut the second column and make it the first. Okay. And then I'm going to do away with text center. And then let's change the heading to an H4 from an H2. And I'll change the text here to "Here's the cool thing about Bootstrap." Okay, and then I'm going to take away the class lead. Alright, and I'll change the text here. This might have been quicker just writing it out from scratch, actually. Alright, and if we refresh, now all we need to do is change the image on the right. So this is simply Bootstrap 2. Alright, so there we have the big Bootstrap image. So you can add the class image responsive, or we could do it later in the CSS. Alright, so next let's do our footer. So we're going to say footer class container dash fluid and text dash center. Alright, and then we'll add our div class row, which will contain our columns. Alright, and then let's start our first column. So this again is a 3-column section. So we're going to reference the number 4 in our columns here. So let's go with col SM for small, so 768 pixel break, and then 4, and then we can close out our class here. And I'm going to copy this and paste it twice over. Okay. Alright, so inside of our first column, let's start off with a heading 3 and write contact us. And then underneath that, let's create a break to create some space between contact us and the address spot. And then H4, our address and contact info here. Alright, and then for the next column, let's add another heading 3 where it says connect. And underneath that, we'll add our social links. Okay, so each social link will contain an A tag. So you can put the URL to your page here. So facebook.com, for example. I'm just going to do the hashtag or pound symbol. And then the class for this font awesome icon is FA-Facebook. Okay, so I'm going to copy this and paste it a few times for the rest of our social links. So there we have the start of our footer with the first social icon at the bottom. Alright, so I'll just paste this a few times. And I'm going to change the second one to Twitter. And then we have Google. And then LinkedIn and YouTube. Or you could do Instagram. Alright, so there we have our social links. And then the last thing that we'll do is we'll add this image, the B for Bootstrap, in the lower right hand corner. So image source, img/b.png, and then class icon. So I want to give it a class so we can give it a size so it's not too large, or a max height and width in the CSS. So that does it for all of our HTML. Now let's take a look at what we have to work with here. It looks pretty messy, and the B is a lot larger than I remembered. So let's move over to our style sheet and get started from the top with our CSS. Alright, so the first thing that we're going to style is the HTML document and body section with a reset style. So let's reference them with HTML, body, and then we'll give them a height and width of 100% just to make sure that our landing screen or the design itself takes up the full height and width. So the next thing that we'll style will be our navigation. So we're going to reference that with Navbar, and that's a class, so we'll want to start with a period. So period Navbar rather than a pound sign for IDs. And then let's give it its background color. So this is the sort of dark blue hex value 23415C. And then if we come over and refresh, now we have the start of our navigation styling. Alright, so then let's give it some padding. So we'll have padding top bottom of 1% and left right 0. Alright, and then we'll give it a font size of 1.2 em. So 1 em is 16 pixels, at least in Google Chrome. 16 is the default font size, so that's about 18 or 19 pixels. Okay, so the next thing that we'll do is let's reference our Navbar brand class for our logo. So navbar-brand. And let's give our logo a minimum height of 55 pixels. and then let's give it some padding, or take away some padding, potentially. Padding 0 top, 15 pixels right, and then 5 pixels underneath. Okay, so that way when we flex the navigation down, the 15 pixels on the right, it should take up some space so our list items don't override the logo. Alright, so now let's lay out our style for the navbar links. So we'll reference them with navbar-default, navbar-nav, li for our list items, then a for the links. And then let's give them a color of D5, 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 which is a really light gray or off-white color. Alright, so there we have them. And there we go. So the next thing that we'll do is let's style the active and hover effect for our navigation link. So I'm just going to copy this and I'll change it to white, and we'll do a hover, comma, and then we can paste it again, or copy this and paste it, and we'll do lia active. .active because it's an active class. So let me just show you in reference here. So there we have our class active. And if you're going to make a multi-page site, you want to have active for the page that you're on. So now we see that the home link, at least, is white, while the rest are the D5 hex value, the really light gray shade. Okay. Alright, so that's all the styling for our navigation. The next thing that we'll drop down to is going to be the styling for the background of our landing page. So if we scroll up, there we have what would be a full screen landing page except for the navigation sitting on top of it. So we'll reference that with the div ID home. So hashtag home, and then background URL, and then in parentheses the image is img/mountains.jpg, and then no repeat, center fixed, so it stays fixed and we can scroll over it. Okay, and then display table and height 100%, position relative, width 100%, and then background size cover. Okay, so without the navigation there, this would be a full screen landing page with that background image. One thing to remember is that if you're using an image where you're concerned with seeing the very top of it, you may want to add padding 50 pixels or so, padding top 50 pixels to the top of the home ID so you can see all of the image without the navigation menu obstructing the first 50 to 70 pixels or so. So now let's style div class landing text. So dot landing dash text, and we're going to have it display as a table cell, and then text align center to center our headings and the button, and then vertical align middle. So the vertical align is going to obviously push it into the middle right here, and then text align center will center it on the page. Okay, so now we have our heading text and the buttons centered. So the next thing that we'll do is let's drop down and style our heading 1. So I'll reference that with dot landing dash text, H1, and then let's give it a font size of 500%, or you can do 5M. Font weight 700 to make it pretty bold. And there we have the Bootstrap text changing for us. Alright, and that's the only heading 1 that we've used so far. Okay, so now let's drop down, and the rest of it is complete as far as the titles up there and the button, or the headings in the button. So let's drop down and let's give some padding to these div class padding classes that we have throughout the website. So reference it with dot padding, and then padding 80 pixels top bottom and 0 left right. So now let's refresh. Okay, and there we have some good spacing above and below our containers here. Alright, so now let's make it so that image displays at 100%. So padding image width 100%. Okay, so that's going to keep it within the column there. And then the next thing that we'll do is let's make our fixed image scrolling effect here. So we'll reference that ID called fixed, and then similar to the image at the top, we'll have a background URL with the image from the starter files. So this is just background.jpg. And then no-repeat, center, center, fixed. And then we'll have this display table. And then height, this is up to you. I'm going to say, or tell it to display at 60% of the screen's height, or the browser's height. Position relative width 100%. Background size cover. Okay. So now if we scroll down, there we have our fixed image background taking up 60% of the screen when we hover over it. Alright, so now let's drop down and let's get started with our footer section. Okay, so we'll reference that with the HTML5 tag footer, and then we'll give it a width of 100%, and then background color will be the same as the navigation, so that's the hex value 23415C, and then we'll give it a padding. So we're going to have padding all around of 5% except for the bottom. Let's add some extra padding at 10% on the bottom. So it goes top, right, bottom, left. And then color white for our text. Alright. So now let's take care of the social icons here, and then we'll resize the B. So we'll reference them with the FA class, so .fa. Let's give them a padding of 15 pixels between one another, or all around, and then a font size of 25 pixels, and then color white, which is the hex value FFF. So now if we refresh, there we have them displaying nicely for us, but if we hover over them, they're underlined and blue. So let's change the hover effect to have the same color as the navigation, D5, 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 And then let's take away the underline with text decoration none. So now if we refresh it, there we have them displaying sort of opposite to the navigation colors. Alright, so now let's make that B much smaller with max width 200 pixels from the icon class. Alright, and that's looking pretty good. So that's all of our style for the full width version. Now we can move over to the mobile version and we'll resize just a couple of things, starting with our heading 1 up there with the Bootstrap text. And then we'll resize our social icons and the B div class icon at the very bottom. Alright, so let's start off our media query here with media, or at media, and then in parentheses, max width 768 pixels. And then let's reference the heading 1 here, and let's change the font size to 300% from 500%. Alright. And next let's change the FA class font size for the social icons. So let's change that to 20 pixels and lower the padding to 10 pixels. Okay. And let's give a little padding to the top of our B icon. So padding top 5%. And then let's change the width or max width to 100 pixels from 200 pixels. Alright, so let's scroll up and see that everything looks like the original here, which I think it does. Okay. And that does it and concludes our responsive Bootstrap website tutorial. I want to thank you for watching. Please remember to like the video, subscribe, and turn on your notifications, and then I'll see you in the next tutorial. Thanks for watching.